Okay, thank you everybody. It's nice to be here, though here is probably a funny way to put it because of course here is my desk back home. But it's nice to be here virtually. Now, this, while it is somewhat exploratory, is a good example of what you can do when COVID hits. Because actually all the research we did for this consisted of looking at pictures. An awful lot of the pictures were my co-authors that they themselves had taken, but there were also pictures from a website that records pictures that people have taken, in this case in the ocean, and then it saves them and it tells the person who's looking where it's come from and what the animal is. So you know that somebody has actually faithfully got the right animal. And that's important because if you look on the web, you can see all sorts of weird things that people say are octopuses. Okay, well, what I was interested in was the idea of appearance as a taxonomic character. It would differentiate between members of two species of a genus, maybe two families, and I could think of different kinds of characteristics. So I could think of morphological ones like this throat display of the lizard, physiological ones that looks like a very low-key animal, or behavioral ones like the dance that this particular male spider, they call it peacock spider, is doing to females. But when I think of a morphological character that will distinguish different species, I tend to think of appearance. And being a bird watcher, I think in terms of, okay, the warblers, a lot of them are yellow. Now, obviously these are males, and obviously this is breeding season. Nonetheless, I would never expect that a yellow warbler would suddenly grow a cap and turn into a Wilson's. So they're distinct and permanently distinct in that sense. But octopuses don't do that. Octopus appearance is very, very flexible. This is all the same species, Octopus vulgaris from the Mediterranean. But you could actually get these changes from a particular individual. So they're not really morphological characters, they're kind of behavioral characters. And the reason they can do this is they have this wonderful chromatophore system. There's a diagram of chromatophore below. There are elastic sacs with pigment in them. When the sacs are contracted, you can't see anything. But there you can see the radial muscles that pull them out. When they pulled them out, the sacs expanded, and then you can see the color that's contained within this. And so in the backdrop, you have a whole set of chromatophores. And notice there are also three different colors. They're yellow, they're red, and they're black. So very, very much a flexible system. Fortunately, some of the components in this flexible system are actually, relatively speaking, fixed. And I got wondering whether they were species typical, whether there was something in the variety that we could kind of dig out into stability. And these four components of appearance, ventral arms, papillae, hood, and eyebar, I will be showing you how they vary morphologically close to the different species. Now, the reason that's interesting is the cephalopods are still very much in flux in terms of species identification. But we used to think that Octopus vulgaris was in Japan, was in China, was in Africa, was in the Caribbean, was in the Mediterranean. And the geneticists said, no, 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 no. They really are separate in these different places, but they're very, very closely related species. Sinensis, tetricus, vulgaris, americanus. Octopus insularis, which is actually shown down here at the bottom, is somewhat related to them, but it is separate from the species complex. And I chose also to use Octopus briareus because briareus isn't related to them at all. So my question is, can I see the relatedness from the appearance? And here's the first of the four. This is ventral arms, which are red-brown. You'll see that in the South African vulgaris, which by the way is still vulgaris, but people are working on figuring out whether it should be a different species. Vulgaris in the Mediterranean, sinensis in Japan, tetricus in Australia, americanus in the Caribbean. They are all very much alike, and if you look at them statistically significantly, they're the same. But then there's insularis that's just a little bit related. It's fairly much related to them, but it's a little bit distant. Notice the ventral arms are red, but they're not smooth red. They're kind of what we call reticulate. And I have to go and get more briareus because briareus has got red ventral arms, and I have to see to what extent this is a characteristic of this species also. A second characteristic that these animals have is raised papillae on the head. Now, these are interesting because the papillae can't be raised, and a lot of the time it's not raised, okay? But it can't be raised except when specific muscles contract. And when Sanders and Packard and Sanders were looking at the characteristics of Octopus vulgaris in the Mediterranean, they said, it's got these particular papillae around the eye. There's two lateral dorsal, there's one anterior, and there's three in a little array ventral. And I couldn't get very many pictures of them because they just don't raise them very much, but I was able to get vulgaris, South African vulgaris, sinensis, and tetricus, and insularis, and they all have this same pattern of raised papillae. And over here you have briareus, which manages an array of pimples. And by the way, I have a lot of pictures of briareus because Caitlin downloaded a very large number, because of course when you say it doesn't have it, you want in some way to be sure that you've seen enough of instances so that you can really say, it doesn't have it, I've looked a lot. And there's two different colorations in the head. One of them is this warm brown that you see on the top of the head, and we call that hood. And then there's dark coming out. This is on the skin, but it's extending the slit pupil of the eye. And both of these things seem to be expressed when the animal is what I would call annoyed. And having a photographer taking flash shots after flash shots after flash shots of you will probably do pretty well for a stimulus for annoyance. Here's hood, and you see the dark on the head, again, in all these species. But insularis is really different. It doesn't have the dark in the eye bulbs. And briareus doesn't manage a hood. It's just getting darker across the whole body of the animal. Eyebar, remember the dark extending from the skin? And what's interesting about the eyebar is insularis has a very, very sort of stable eyebar. It's thin eyebar that's always there. And there's briareus, which makes dark eyes, no bar. So what we have is close genetic relationship, close resemblance. But if it's changeable, does that make it does that make it a morphological characteristic, or does that make it a behavioral characteristic? It's probably a bit of both. Questions?